Helping people understand history and how it keeps repeating itself. The brainwashing of people, we're here to unhypnotize. Open your eyes and mind. See how you can be the change. Topics include Antonio to Plato, or allegory of the cave. Montauk Project, Mandela effect. Problem with using labels and other topics that are considered conspiracy
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Back the Light. Tonight, we're going to explore how ideas spread, shift, and shape our reality, and take a closer look at awareness, influence, and the power of collective consciousness. And now I present Article 4. The effect is a phenomenon in which a new idea or behavior spreads rapidly by unexplained means. Once it reaches a certain amount of people, it starts to infiltrate other connected groups. This originated with observations by a Japanese primatologist studying the macaca fuscata, that monkeys from one island in a Japanese archipelago started washing their sweet potatoes before consumption. Once enough monkeys knew of this, it spread over the water to the other troops on the other islands. Does this in effect prove that we have collective consciousness? We believe something to be true, it manifests as such to the collective? Can new awareness be communicated through mental energy? Is it a variant of social contagion? Perhaps it has much more logical causes, such as environment, necessity, or more subtle means of communication. It does, however, raise the question: if beneficial or productive ideas or behaviors can spread this way, will not ones that are not beneficial or productive do the same? And are you the 100th monkey?
The 100th Monkey is a philosophy based upon the writing of a man named Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake lives in England, and he has written a book, which I've been studying, called A New Science of Life. And it was voted by the American Academy of Physics as the book most likely to be burned by their academy. All right? Because it is so blasphemous and absurd and silly, the notions inside of it. What Rupert Sheldrake is suggesting is that memory, which is what we can recall of all the things that have happened to it, is simply not stored in the brain. It's just not stored in the brain. All kinds of physical evidence to, like where they do experiments with cutting out pieces of the brain, a lot of ways of scientific evidence of establishing this belief. Just let it in. Don't endorse it, just let it in. Don't bite off my finger. Just look to where it's pointing for a few minutes, okay? The notion is that if memory, of course, is not stored in our brain, then where is it? Right? The philosophy is very simple, that all members of a species are connected together through what they call morphogenetic fields, just very much like magnets. And these fields surround all human beings. The 100th monkey is the number. The 100th monkey. Off the coast of Japan, there's an island. And they took a group of these monkeys from one species, and they put sweet potatoes out there on the beach. And they watched the monkeys. And the monkeys began to wash the sweet potatoes in a certain way that was peculiar to this species. And they began to eat them in a way that was peculiar to this species. After a given amount of time, when a certain number of monkeys within that species began to do that, the same behavior began to crop up in monkeys of the same species on islands 200 and 300 miles away. Question is, how did it happen? How could that have happened? And that's, without going into all the details of that, if there is truth that all members of a species are connected, that all human beings are connected as well. And if all of us are connected in some way that we don't understand, but in fact are connected, then I'm not here to tell you that you have to be thinking positive thoughts because it'll improve your life. I'm here to tell you that you have an obligation because you could be depressing somebody in Uruguay right now by thinking negative thoughts. It's true. Now just think about it. Just let it in. The highest form of ignorance is to reject something you know nothing about. That's the highest form you can get to. We know so little about this whole idea. But what we do know is that when human beings begin to think in positive, healthy ways, that they reduce certain endorphins into the chemistry of your blood. This is from Anatomy of an Illness, Norman Cousins. And that when you think positive, happy, loving, laughing thoughts, there's a different chemistry that goes into your body than when you think depressing, negative, anguishing, despairing thoughts. And that thinking, the way that you decide to think, has a dramatic effect on your chemistry and on your physiology and on your health as a human being. And that we know that when they did the artificial heart transplants, when they were looking for all the people up in Kentucky, who they were going to pick, there were many, many volunteers because a lot of these people only have a few weeks left to live. So if they could get a few more months, they were very willing to be expendable. The number one criteria was the will to live. What kind of an attitude does this human being have? How do they think? Because we do not want somebody who gives up on life, who is going to feel bad, who is going to be telling himself that he shouldn't be in this position. So as you begin to think about the possibility, here's what Ken Keyes did in The 100th Monkey. He said, and The 100th Monkey is about nothing I've said so far. That's just all what I learned through my own research and my own reading and so on. The 100th Monkey is a book about nuclear war. The belief is this: if enough people on our planet think there's going to be a nuclear holocaust and believe that it's going to happen, we are going to create it by the way that we think. When a critical mass, and that's the theory, the 100th monkey, when you get to a certain number of people thinking anything, then it begins to spread to the rest of us all over our planet, and we begin to act upon those collective thoughts. The thinking is, who knows, I'm open to it, that we are not only connected to everybody who's alive, but everybody who ever has been, and everybody who ever will be. That we may all in some way be connected. So that if we want, the number one thing in the Hunger Project is that we are trying to raise the consciousness of the world, to help people to understand that starvation is something we cannot tolerate any longer. We won't have it. We won't think of it as something that is inevitable. What is happening now is people are beginning to say, what can I do? How can I change that? The same thing is true with nuclear war. If you want to think about raising your children, my friends, what more important parental task do you have than to make sure that our world is a place that's going to be inhabitable for our children and our grandchildren? As Victor Hugo said, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And we can make any idea have its time come by collectively thinking in these ways. And imagine that we're all connected like this. Imagine.
There's something quietly unsettling about that idea, isn't there? Not in a fear-based way, but in a responsibility kind of way. Because if something can spread without clear explanation, then what exactly are we participating in every single day without realizing it? Not just what we say out loud, not just what we post, but what we accept, what we normalize, and what we stop questioning. And maybe, That's where this gets more interesting than the story itself. Because whether or not the original phenomenon happened exactly as described, the pattern behind it, that's something we can actually observe everywhere. Ideas don't always spread logically. They don't always spread because they're true. They spread because, at some point, enough people stopped resisting them. And that moment, it's rarely loud. It doesn't feel like a turning point. It feels like, I guess this is just how things are now. Think about how many things in your life became normal without you consciously choosing them. The way people communicate, the spread of everything, the expectations placed on you, even the things you worry about. At some point, those were introduced. At some point, they were questioned. At some point, they felt unfamiliar. And then they crossed a threshold. Not necessarily because they were right, but because they were repeated. And repetition is powerful in a way we don't always give enough attention to. Not dramatic repetition, not forced repetition, subtle, constant, background repetition. It's like your mind slowly starts to say, well, if this keeps showing up, there must be something to it. And that's where things get interesting psychologically, because humans are not just individual thinkers. We are pattern recognizers inside of a social environment. We don't just ask, is this true? We also, often, unconsciously ask, is this accepted? And those two questions don't always lead to the same answer. There's a kind of invisible pressure that comes from the collective agreement. Not direct pressure, not someone forcing you, more like an atmosphere. When enough people act like something is obvious, you start to feel like questioning it makes you the one who's off, even if you can't quite explain why it doesn't sit right. And this isn't about intelligence. It's not about being awake or asleep. It's about being human. We are wired for connection. We are wired to belong. And sometimes, belonging quietly shapes belief. One thing that often goes unnoticed is how the media doesn't just report what's happening, it frames it. Take, for example, historical events like the Summer of Love. Depending on who's telling the story, it was either a beautiful cultural awakening or a chaotic, risky social experiment. Even in modern times, phrases like mostly peaceful have shifted how we perceive protests and social movements. Media doesn't just tell us what happened, it tells us what to feel about it. It amplifies certain ideas and quietly ignores others. And that amplification, it acts like a second layer of the 100th monkey effect, not only in areas spreading from person to person, but now they're broadcast, repeated, and reinforced to millions. In subtle, almost invisible, but over time, it shapes collective perception more than any single conversation could. Now here's where I want to go a layer deeper, because the idea of something spreading isn't just about big cultural shifts. It happens in micro moments too, in conversations, in families, in friend groups. One person starts seeing something a certain way, then another considers it. Then another stops pushing back, and suddenly the tone of the entire group changes. Not because there was a meeting, not because everybody agreed out loud, but because something crossed that invisible line. And once it's crossed, it's very hard to see the same way again. Take a moment and think, where have we seen this in our lives? Look how much narratives shift just because, quote unquote, the news told us to think a certain way. And not just the news. just our circle of influences. Maybe you thought of something and you shared it with somebody and they didn't support it. So quietly, you stopped believing in it yourself. But the great thing is that it could work both ways. You start believing in something, someone believes in it, and you get an extra boost and you feel powerful to move forward. Take a moment and reflect how many times that's happened in your life or in the lives of others. You see somebody that's entrepreneurial mindset and they're gung-ho to start something and then it fizzles out. Sometimes it's not because they didn't believe in it. It's because others around them didn't believe in their vision. There's also something else worth exploring here. The difference between learning something and absorbing something. Learning feels active. You seek it out, you question it, you process it. Absorbing is quieter. It happens while you're just living life, through what you watch, what you scroll past, what you hear repeatedly in the background. And over time, absorption can feel like your own conclusion, even if you've never consciously examined it. So, then the question becomes, how much of what we believe is actually ours? Not in a confrontational way, just in a curious way. Because if ideas can spread, not just through conversation, but through presence, through repetition, through subtle agreement, then influence doesn't always look like influence. It looks like environment. And environment is powerful, stronger than most people realize. You could take the same person, put them in two completely different environments, and watch their beliefs shift over time without them even noticing it's happening. Talking about those subtle changes, beyond the big cultural moments, shifts happen quietly in everyday life. Language changes, habits evolve, and what used to feel unusual becomes standard without anyone noticing. For example, small things like how we greet each other, acceptable workplace behaviors, social media trends, even our day-to-day consumption of information. In today's world, social media acts like an invisible network of monkeys passing ideas back and forth. A trend, a belief, or even a meme can reach places worldwide in a matter of moments, reaching tipping points that were previously measured in years or generations. Every like, share, and comment is a tiny nudge pushing an idea further into the collective consciousness. Sometimes it's trivial, sometimes it's profound, but the mechanics are the same. Ideas spread faster than ever before, and often without anyone thinking consciously about the influence they're amplifying. There's also a generational layer to all of this, because each generation grows up inside a slightly different normal. What feels unquestionable to one group might feel completely flexible to another, and vice versa. So when we talk about ideas spreading, we're also talking about time. What crosses the threshold today might be re-examined tomorrow. And sometimes those norms shift in ways that are shocking when you step back. Some topics that were once universally condemned slowly shift into areas where conversation becomes blurred. Examples include societal attitudes toward child protection, pedophilia, or certain drug cultures. Not everyone accepts these shifts, but the subtle changes in what's tolerated, what's spoken about, and what's ignored shows how collective perception evolves. We see this even in ordinary everyday experiences. What's allowed in school curricula? What's normalized in entertainment? They all play a role in shaping the new normal. We may not even realize we've absorbed these changes until we see them reflected in the younger generation, or until we compare our experiences to a historical lens. All of these build a background rhythm that slowly nudges our collective consciousness. Like water, slowly carving stone, it's not dramatic, but it's persistent. These micro shifts are where the 100th monkey effect can operate in the modern world, quietly, imperceptibly, until suddenly everyone realizes, oh, this is just how things are now. So is it about a 100th monkey, or is it about a tipping point in shared perception? And if there is a tipping point, then every person before that point matters. Not because they're trying to change the world, but because they're holding a perspective that hasn't yet been absorbed. Which brings up another angle. What happens to ideas that don't reach that tipping point? Do they disappear? Or do they just stay quiet? There are probably countless perspectives that never spread, not because they weren't valuable, but because they didn't get repeated enough, or visible enough, or accepted enough. And on the flip side, there are ideas that spread very quickly that we later look back on and question. So, the speed of spread doesn't necessarily equal truth. It might reflect emotion, or timing, or collective need, or even collective fear. Because fear spreads fast. Psychologically, ideas that trigger strong emotions, like fear, outrage, spread faster than calm, reasoned perspectives. Fear can act like a wildfire, igniting rapidly across a group, while curiosity moves slower, like water seeping into the soil. Repetition strengthens this effect. The more often we see an idea, the more our mind begins to accept it. Not always because it's true, but because it feels familiar. And familiarity, in social terms, often equals acceptance. Certainty spreads fast too, especially when it removes the discomfort of not knowing. But curiosity moves slower. It asks questions instead of giving answers. It creates space instead of closing it. And in a world where things spread quickly, slower processes can sometimes feel invisible. Now let's take a moment to think about where this shows up in your life. Perhaps along your awakening journey. How many times have you told somebody one of your beliefs, but it went unheard, so you just stopped trying? Again, we can add the media, and they amplify a narrative. And maybe it's what you believe, and maybe it's something you know and feel in your core isn't true. That goes back to sometimes things that are not true or did not resonate with us get more screen time. And so, over time, it's repeated until it becomes the norm. History is full of moments where public perception changed quietly, only to appear sudden in hindsight. Consider how movements or cultural events were described in newspapers, books, and speeches. Sometimes, the story remembered by the public is very different from what actually happened, because the narrative that was amplified shaped collective memory more than facts themselves.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started. And
first thing I want to make perfectly clear: this has been almost entirely peaceful. In fact, completely peaceful.
It's been a mostly peaceful protest, but then they chose to move in.
Many of these protests have been largely peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I'm looking at those live pictures next to you, and they seem very peaceful.
There are always folks on the fringes of protest that do the things that we don't like.
A few people who break a few windows and burn a few cars.
They just threw something on fire, Chris, a firecracker. Something's on fire.
No one should be destructing property and that sort of thing, but I understand the anger.
Discount people who are doing things to public property that they shouldn't be doing. It does have to be understood that this city has got, for the last several years, an issue with police.
So many good people out there who want change and who are demanding change.
Our country was started because this is how the Boston Tea Party, rioting. So do not get it twisted and think that, oh, this is something that has never happened before, and then this is so terrible, and where are we, and these savages and all of that. This is how this country was started.
It's a reminder that influence doesn't always come from action alone. It comes from how stories are told, repeated, and framed. Which means the 100th monkey moment might not be permanent. It might just be a phase in a longer cycle of awareness. And that opens up a different kind of question. If something can spread unconsciously, can it also be shifted consciously? Not forced, not imposed, but gently, intentionally, reconsidered. Maybe not by trying to convince everybody, but by simply choosing what you engage with, what you repeat, and what you give energy to. Because participation doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like attention. What you consistently give your attention to grows, and in your mind and often in the world around you. So then, are we passive recipients of spreading ideas, or are we quiet participants in what spreads? Maybe both. And maybe the more aware we become of that, the more intentional that participation can be. Not in a controlling way, but in a grounded, observant, thoughtful way. Because not everything needs to be accepted immediately, and not everything needs to be rejected immediately either. Some things just need to be noticed before they become part of you without permission. When we start thinking about the ideas we absorb and amplify, it's worth asking ourselves, which ideas am I repeating without even thinking about it? Which ideas am I paying attention to, whether consciously or unconsciously, that shape the world around me? Are there perspectives I haven't noticed because of the media, the culture, or my peer group hasn't amplified them? Awareness itself becomes a kind of resistance, not opposition, not forcing a narrative, but simply noticing the ways ideas spread and choosing thoughtfully, mindfully, where to place your attention. Because whether it's a viral trend, a historical movement, or a shift in what's considered acceptable, participation is happening, even when it feels invisible. And maybe that's the true lesson of the 100th monkey, realizing how interconnected our perceptions are, and how even small, quiet choices ripple outward. Because, after all, we're all connected, we're all one. So, is it about a 100th monkey? Or is it about the tipping point in shared perception? Now let's go back to the generational acceptance. When I was younger, if you were attracted to a child, that was considered disgusting, but somehow society has slowly allowed that to creep in to our awareness and acceptance. What about all of the hype around allowing a child to make decisions that would alter their lives forever? It just always struck me weird that you need to be a certain age to get a tattoo, to fight for your country, but not to make a decision like that? And I'm all for, if you're an adult, go for it. But back in the day, if you were to say half of the things that are allowed by parents and doctors, it would have been considered child abuse or child neglect. That really brings home the message of, what are we allowing to be amplified? Was the 1% really louder than the rest of us? Or did the media have some kind of responsibility for that? And what about the lockdowns? The summer of love? There are so many examples in just this short amount of time that we all lived through where we knew internally something wasn't right. But did you speak up? Were you trying to be the voice of reason in a sea of madness? So when we come back to that final question, are you the 100th monkey? Maybe it's not about being the one who triggers a massive shift. Maybe it's about recognizing that shifts are happening all the time, quietly, gradually, subtly. And you are already inside of one. The real question might be, which ones are you reinforcing without realizing it? And which ones are you willing to pause and look at just a little bit longer? Not to arrive at a final answer, but to make sure the answer you do live by is one you actually choose. Because in a world where things spread, awareness might be the only thing that slows it down enough for you to decide. And maybe that's where real change begins. Not loudly, not all at once, but right there, in that quiet moment where you notice something before it becomes a part of you. Thank you all so much for being here. A huge thanks to our mod Claudia, producer Carrie, and songwriter Todd. And to you, our listeners. Thank you for opening your mind. Remember, every story we believe shapes our reality. Stay curious and don't be afraid to question the narrative.
Only after the truth has come about, it walks into the room with lies thrown throughout. Can the minds of the sleeping and the lying about awake from their slumber to stumble on out of the mind control that has placed them inside rooms of deception the human brain provides. No place for logic in these darkened rooms. Common sense lost within the vacuum of construes, leaving no hope for rescue in this lying state. Rooms piling high with just more of the same. Unless, of course, the light of truth, like the break of day, finds its way through the keyhole of night, unlocking the way, opening the door for the dawning to be saved. That's what we do in this awakening and calling, locating room keys with names stamped upon them, and that one single truth which unlocks the minds of our brothers and sisters, one room at a time. Room service for service for the mind.